The fact he's brave enough to talk about it, I admire that. We're all glad he's well. There's a lot of stress in that job, and they have to make sure their mental health is taken care of.
Pretty amazing that he came out publicly and raised awareness on depression and anxiety. I thought it was very brave.
For Justice Gascon to come forward and talk about what he was grappling with, I hope it allows other folks to realize that they're not alone. And I wish his family and him the best in terms of dealing with this, which is something very difficult and something that happens to a lot of people.
A Supreme Court of Canada justice has opened up about his battle with mental health. Clément Gascon disappeared for several hours last Wednesday, prompting his family to file a missing person report. Gascon has released a statement explaining what happened and defending his continuing role as a judge, saying, "For over 20 years, I have been dealing with a sometimes insidious illness, depression and anxiety disorders." On the afternoon of Wednesday, May 8th, affected both by the recent announcement of a difficult and heart-rending career decision and by a change in medication, I conducted myself, the statement goes on to say, in an unprecedented and unaccustomed manner by going out without warning and remaining out of touch for several hours. I can neither explain nor justify what I understand to have been a panic attack, he says, and I wish to apologize most profusely to all those who suffered as a result. I confirm, the justice goes on, that I am in good health and am fully capable of performing my duties as a judge. Justice Gascon is set to retire in September, but how significant is it for a public figure to come forward and speak so openly about a challenge like this? Bob Rae is a former Premier of Ontario and federal party leader who has spoken openly about the challenges of coping with anxiety and depression. He joins me now from Toronto. Hi, Mr. Rae. Nice to see you.
Thank you so much, Vashi. Nice to be with you.
Thanks for making time for us. You tweeted your support, and that's what initially made me want to interview you today. You tweeted your support for Justice Gascon after his statement that he released. You wrote that he was speaking for, quote, all of us who have suffered depression and anxiety. What did you think when you read his statement?
I was very proud of him. I thought it took a lot of courage for him to do it, but I think it's also a time and a moment in not only Canada's history, but in the history of a great many countries when our attitudes to, public attitudes to mental health issues and to depression and anxiety issues are changing all the time. I think every family in the country is touched by this. And those of us who've gone through episodes personally know how tough it is. And also, through recent history, it's been harder to talk about it publicly, and often people get punished for, in various ways at work or reputationally in various ways, for admitting that they've had periods of challenges. And I think there are a lot of us who are in this camp. Some of us are talking about it more publicly, but I think it's very, very important that Justice Gascon did this. And I think it's frankly very important to see the outpouring of feeling and support, not only from his colleagues on the bench, but from people generally. I think it represents an important shift in public feeling and public opinion, and I think it's tremendous.
Yeah, I was struck by that too. I noticed there was just a resounding level of support for him, among the general public who were reading what he said, but also, like you said, from Justice Wagner, who released a statement right away, from other justices of the Supreme Court who voiced their support for him as well. Do you think it does signify a more permanent shift?
I hope so. I mean, it's a challenge. There is still a tremendous stigma to mental illness, and it's often something that we all incorporate in our own behavior. I know in my own case, I went through a tough period when I was younger than I am now, and a lot of people said, well, for heaven's sake, once you get over it, don't talk about it. But I decided that it was better for me to do so, and
Why?
Well, because I felt it was just part of being myself. I wanted to say that I didn't feel any personal sense of shame that I'd gone through this, and I'd seen a great many other people in my life who've suffered with alcohol addiction or other forms of addiction, who have felt they had to cover it up or were not prepared to admit to it and had great difficulty in admitting to it. And once they'd admitted to it, in many cases suffered very badly. I mean, there was a vice presidential candidate in the Democratic Party of the United States Thomas Eagleson, who was forced off the ticket because he admitted that he'd had treatment for depression. So I think we really have seen a change. Justice Ledane faced great difficulties because of his experience, and I think that's caused a great deal of sadness to him and to his family, and frankly to all of us who look at this and say, we know from everything we know tells us that people can get better. They can get better much more quickly than people think. That it's an illness. It's not it's not just being sad or whatever. And it's important for people to understand that we can deal with the causes of it and we can deal with its impacts, and it shouldn't hold people back.
What do you think it does to that kind of conversation when someone who holds a job like Justice Gascon, I mean, this is, the top legal job in the country. He's one of the top legal minds in the country, sitting on the top bench in the country, saying these things so candidly. What do you think that does to the conversation?
I think it helps a lot, and that's why I wanted to go on Twitter and praise Mr. Justice Gascon. He's not somebody that I know personally very well, other than just passing in events in Ottawa, but certainly something that I wanted to signal to, for whatever it's worth, that I think it's very important that people embrace the facts and embrace the situation and frankly embrace him. And I think more important than anything that I've said is what Justice Wagner said. And that his colleagues have said, and that is that we are living in a different time today, and I think it's important for other people, for young people, for children, for everybody else to know that there's help out there, and there's also a public that's willing to respond in a caring way, and we have to deal with that, with the stigma and with the challenge that our society faces because of the extraordinary cost of not facing up to the reality of mental illness.
He's kind of outside the political world, at arm's length from it. But what do you think about the discussion in politics? Is it where you'd like to see it? I mean, we have seen a lot of staffers come forward. We know it's a high pressure job. It's a high pressure world. We know that. It's very rare to have people like you come out and tell us about your struggles.
Yeah, well, it is, but it also it's I think increasingly the case. Mm-hmm. And I also feel very strongly that, in many ways, mental illness is one of the last frontiers of modern medicine. We're afraid to talk about it, and we're afraid to face up to it. And in many cases, it's a stigma that goes back centuries in our culture. Nobody wants to be portrayed as crazy, and there's been a tremendous tendency to lock people up or put them away, or for people to hide their own emotions. And I think that's contributed to the problem. And we underfund mental health in all the healthcare plans in the provinces. We don't do enough to face up to the worst sides of the consequences. And in suicide, we're very slow in developing suicide strategies effectively for many different groups, many different people, and for communities across the country that are faced with it. We face an opioid drug crisis, which is really devastating many people in many communities. And these things don't go talked about enough, and are frequently, I think, unrecognized by people in our society. So we still have a ways to go to make real progress.
His statement also didn't gloss over anything. I mean, he was very candid about not just the fact that he was revealing that he suffered from anxiety and depression, but that he felt like he had a panic attack that day that he was reported missing, and that he couldn't really explain it. Was that relatable?
Oh, completely. And I think a lot of people would relate to that. I mean, I think sometimes we confuse depression and anxiety with feeling sad or being upset. But in fact, it's an almost like an out of body experience. I mean, it's not something you can readily control. And I think that people who have a fear of going into public places, or who get claustrophobia or anything else, will identify right away with what it means to have a panic attack. A panic attack is a real thing, and it's not something to be made fun of, and it's not something to be ridiculed. It's a reality. It's one of the symptoms of this illness, and so for him to say, I had a panic attack, I think anybody who's been there will know exactly what he's talking about. And I think the other important point to say is, as he said in his statement, it's treatable. He's had a battle with it, and it's an illness that can come and go. It's also an illness that can come and go and not come back. And so I think it's really important for there to be a much wider discussion about what this means for people and how important it is to appreciate that we need to embrace that side of ourselves and that side of our society.
Well, I appreciate you coming on to discuss this today. Thank you so much, Mr.
Thank you.
Ray.
Good to talk to you.
Pleasure to have you on as always.
Take care.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.